In the name of the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. Peace and grace. Blessed Coptic New Year to everyone. For those who are not familiar with the Coptic calendar, today is 2/16, 1742. The Coptic calendar. Tut, it's the month is called Tut in Coptic. So cool that you ask. The Coptic calendar started a couple of hundred years after Christ's resurrection, and that's because it was the start of. It started around the time of the martyrs. Okay, where the martyrs were being. Most or majority of the martyrs started being killed by the Roman Empire, by the other nations around them. But it was persecution by the Roman Empire at first. Then came the Byzantines and so forth. So that Coptic calendar is basically centered around the age of the martyrs. We can call it. And calendars are important, right? So. Everybody know why we have our calendars AD, BC. Anybody know? Before Christ and after the death of Christ. Yeah. Okay. So today we're going to discuss a little bit of history, and we're going to go through a timeline. And I have a small little chart up there with a timeline, and we're going to discuss 4 kingdoms. Now, these 4 kingdoms, I love history a lot, and I love reading about these kingdoms, and not just because they're biblical, but because I believe they led to where society is today, to the forms of government and civilization. But these kingdoms play an important role in the history, not of just the biblical nation of Israel, but actually Christianity. Okay, all this was part of God's plan. But you see, we actually caused, we caused all the events that happened in these nations. For instance, in the last year or two, we've been talking a lot about the Old Testament, right? We were talking about that journey that we were taking with God. Okay, that journey that nation of Israel took, and how the nation of Israel would turn away from God, and God would let them do what they want, and they face the consequences. And that's what happened with these nations. These nations would begin to overtake the nation of Israel. The nation of Israel at the time was the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. Obviously, the northern kingdom got taken first, and then the southern kingdom. And the southern kingdom got taken. The southern kingdom got taken about 600 BC. I believe the number. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, the southern kingdom was taken around that time, and when it was taken by the Babylonian Empire. All right. Does anybody know who the first king that was mentioned in the Bible, in the Babylonian Empire, after it was taken? Nebuchadnezzar. All right. So let's talk a little about Babylon. All right. Babylon emerged actually at the fall of Assyria. You all remember Assyria was one of the enemies of Israel. They tried to invade the kingdom of Israel many times, and God would stop them. Well, Babylon overtook Assyria, and Nebuchadnezzar was one of the most famous kings in Babylon. He wasn't the first. The first actually is called Nabopolassar, but Nebuchadnezzar II, he's known as Nebuchadnezzar II, he expanded west and rebuilt Babylon. And Babylon was based on an absolute monarchy. Okay, the king's job was to rule over all of Babylon and protect the temples. That was how the Babylonian government was set up. Now, in the book of Daniel, and I'm going to ask someone to pull this out, Daniel chapter 2, verses 31 to 38. In the book of Daniel, Babylon is mentioned as the head of gold. Can someone pull that out for me and read it out loud? Mike is right there. Sure, go ahead, please.
Daniel 2, 31 to 38.
Chapters 2, 31 to 38.
Okay. You, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. This image's head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of
I
iron.
want to stop right there. So we're going to go through this, but his head is what? Head of gold. That's the first kingdom, all right? The kingdom of Babylon, all right? And the kingdom of Babylon, Daniel is prophesying to King Nebuchadnezzar, and it leads up to the part where he talks about the downfall of Babylon, but he's talking about the other nations. He's talking about the head of gold. What was the next part of it?
Chest and arms of silver.
Chest and arms of silver. So that's the next kingdom, and after that?
Belly and thighs of bronze.
Yep, a belly and thighs of bronze, and that's the next one. And finally?
Legs of iron.
Legs of iron. So those represent the four kingdoms. So Daniel, in his book, he prophesied about these kingdoms that would actually rule over Israel, because Israel had lost faith in God. And so God basically came and said they will be ruled by other nations. Okay, and this is what happened to them. As a matter of fact, Isaiah, one of the kings of Jerusalem, the Babylonians came to see the temple and all the treasures of a temple, and he was showing it off. And Isaiah actually prophesied that this nation would come and take all your treasures and take the land. What happened when Babylon invaded? Well, there's a lot of negative things that happened. We'll just discuss a few of them real fast. The destruction of Jerusalem and of the first temple. So the Temple of Solomon was destroyed by Babylon, all right? And it was destroyed around 586 BC, and then everyone was deported from the land. So the Jews were taken from the land of Israel. The Israelites lost the land. Okay, they lost all that land. So that land, as you know, that land was at war. Probably most of the time Israel was there before them, and even till today. That piece of land. Okay, we all know what land that is. It had many names. Judean territories. It was also the Judean province. The Philistine territories, the Palestinian territories, and now today part of it is called Israel, and the other part Palestine, and then you have Jordan around. So this land actually extended beyond what we know today. Okay, it was a big piece of land. It wasn't just what you see today. That's just the smaller version of it. But the land was taken from the Jews. It was no longer theirs, and Babylon ruled over it. What positives came out of being ruled by another nation, or being ruled by Babylon specifically? Well, the first thing I can say is the preservation and purification of faith during exile. And And basically, you find a lot of things that happen throughout the book of Daniel. You have the Jews are actually starting to regroup. Their faith is getting stronger. Some of the stories with Daniel. Does anybody know some of the stories that happen with Daniel? The lion's cave, interpreting the dreams. Okay, so there's like a little rebirth there happening for the Jewish religion. Okay, so the religion is rebounding, right? When they were in their own land and they were comfortable and they felt, I would say, too safe, right? They got too comfortable and they weren't focusing on the true goal, and that's salvation, that's God. They were focusing elsewhere. Okay, and this is what when Babylon took them over, then they started coming back to God. Okay, and you see these stories. You even see the stories of the three saintly youth. Anybody know about them? The three that were thrown in the fire. Yeah, so you read these, and these are things that are happening when they're in exile, when they're outside of their land. And then there's obviously the fulfillment of prophetic warnings confirms God's sovereignty. God told them they will no longer be in that land through his prophets. The prophecies for Daniel, where he was saying another kingdom will come and take. All right, and we're going to talk about that kingdom, actually. That's the next kingdom. But this is what really was the contribution of Babylon. Babylon didn't last too long. If you look at the chart right there, they didn't last very long. All right. Actually, Babylon's demise at the end leads to something very spectacular. Okay, something that was in God's plan, and it would lead up to the days of Christ, when there was a temple there, and Christ was in what the Romans called the province of Judea, I would say. And the next empire right after Babylon was the Persian Empire. Okay, that is the kingdom of silver. Okay, that was mentioned in what you just read. You want to read that part again?
And then the image's head was of fine gold, and then its chest and arms of silver.
Yes. So that kingdom represented silver, and this is the prophecies that Daniel was saying. Okay, he's talking about these kingdoms. There's other signs of this kingdom. There is the bear raised on one side, a ram with two horns, and the two horns are very important in this case. Okay, what are the two horns? Well, the Persian Empire was made up of two groups of people, and one of them was actually in partnership with those ruling in Babylon before. It was the Medes. Okay, so if you ever hear about the kingdoms of Persia, it was actually the kingdom of Media and Persia, and a lot of people don't know this, but these are two people that united together and they ruled. Well, this happened overnight. They literally overthrew the Babylonians, took over the land, and they actually expanded. The Persian Empire was far greater. They expanded even farther than the Babylonians did. So what happened in Persia? Well, in 550 BC, Cyrus the Great united Media and Persia, conquered Lydia and Babylon, and took Egypt. That's how far they expanded. So they took the kingdom of Egypt. They had the same thing, something similar. They had a centralized monarchy, so it was full control. But, and this is why I was saying these nations, actually, I believe truly that they led society to where it is today, to the types of governments you see around the world. So the Persians were the first to actually have satraps, um, people who administered in different provinces. They would rule those provinces, and they would make sure everyone there abided by the law, and their taxes were paid and everything. So that's one of the contributions Persia actually brought to this world. It was a lot of organization. It was one of, I would say, it started bringing that formation of government, a different kind of government than before. Because before, all these kingdoms, all of them, they had the monarch, whether it was a pharaoh, a king, an emperor, they all had direct control. They had their hands in everything. This time it didn't happen that way. There was a monarch over the satraps, and the satraps were the ones who controlled the different provinces. That's just a brief history of Persia. So what happened exactly when they invaded Israel? Well, when they invaded Babylon. Okay. Well, I'm going to talk about the negatives first, but to get to the negatives, we have to talk about some of the positives. So during the time of Persia, a couple of things happened. The first one is Israel was given permission to go back to the land and rebuild their temple. Okay? That's very important. But something else happened. It wasn't going to be that easy. Okay? You're not going to get it back that easily. No. One of the things that happened, and this is actually in Ezra. I don't know if we covered that book here yet, but Ezra was the one who led the people back to the land. He wrote the books. He actually wrote his book and Chronicles. He wrote the book of Chronicles, which talked about the kings of Judea, the southern kingdom. It mostly talked about that because that's where the journey began, especially after the split. So there was local opposition. Okay, the people of that land. Remember, I told you that land was at war. That land, nobody wants to give up that land. Everyone's been fighting for it, right? Even before the holy sites, even before the sepulcher, the temple, whatever it was, people were fighting over that piece of land. All right. So the people of that land sent a message because Persia had already invaded the entire land. All the kingdoms there were invaded, right? They sent a message to the king and told him that these Jews are troublemakers, and it is not beneficial to the king and the kingdom to allow them to stay in the land or rebuild their temple. Okay, actually, they also said the temple brought some form of grief. So there was local opposition to that. The other important thing that happened against Israel and Persia. Does everybody here know Esther's story? So Haman was an Agagite. Can anybody tell me why he's named Haman the Agagite? Okay, I'll tell you. Back in the books of Samuel, all right, I believe it's 1 Samuel, Saul was sent to destroy a city and destroy everything in it. Okay? He allowed the king and his family of that land to live. Okay? And God had told him everyone goes. Okay? Samuel comes. He comes to Saul and tells him, you disobeyed God. All right? And Samuel kills the king. He's like, God ordered his death. But the family of the king lived. And Haman, the Agagite, was a descendant of Agag, King Agag. Yeah. Yes. Yes, exactly. So he's from that clan. So his family has hated the Jews probably every single generation. So Haman brings these charges against these people, right? He goes to the king. Now, remember what I told you. The king in Persia did not have his hands in everything, all right? Haman was one of his top officials, right? Over the satraps. He's even higher than satraps. So whatever he tells the king will trust, okay? So Haman, because of his hatred for the Jews and Mordecai, who was Esther's uncle, or cousin, I believe it was cousin. He hated the Jews so much, he brought up false accusations and says we need to get the kingdom rid of these people. All right, get rid of these people for the sake of the kingdom. And of course, the king, because that's his right hand person, he agrees to it. But the king didn't know that Haman was actually lying to him. So, and I'll say the rest of the story in a short summary. Basically, towards the end of the story, Esther finds out about it. She's queen. She's the king's wife, and Esther tells everyone to fast for 3 days, fast and pray. She then approaches the king. Back then in Persia, there was one rule. It was a big rule. I actually read extra biblical sources to actually verify. You couldn't just walk up to the king of Persia and talk to him in the hall. Even officials, even if you're the highest ranking person, you can't just walk up into the hall if you're not invited. If you do, the king has two options. He either puts out his scepter and you touch it, and then that means you can talk to him, or you get killed. So even his wife was under the same law. So she had everyone fast for 3 days, and she knew her life was at risk. She goes into the hall to see the king of Persia, and he extends his scepter, so giving her permission to speak. She goes and invites the king and Haman to dinner. Now, obviously, Haman was boasting about it, right? Esther had other plans. She invited the king to dinner, and then she told the king at dinner in front of Haman, hey, can you come tomorrow? I'm going to throw another banquet for you, and then I will tell you what I want. All right? When he goes again with Haman, this time Esther tells him, she tells him, my people were sold. Okay? It wasn't to slavery, it was to death, right? Haman wants them killed on a specific day and whatever it was. So the king is like baffled. Like I said, he doesn't have his hands in everything, right? He's baffled that she's saying this. He doesn't know she's a Jew. He didn't know she was a Jew. And he didn't realize that her people were the ones going to get purged from the kingdom, right? So, when the king finds out, there's a lot of scenes, right, from it. You can put in your head. He leaves for a second or turns his back for a second, and Haman is like harassing the queen, begging her to talk to the king on his behalf so he doesn't lose his life. And then the king, sees him harassing her, and has him hung on gallows that were actually built for Esther's cousin. Okay, so Haman was going to hang Esther's cousin Mordecai, and instead the king has him hung on those gallows. And then the rest of the story, Israel is saved. They were given permission on the day that the Persians were told to kill the Jews. They were given permission to defend themselves and to take whatever goods from those who attack them, whatever goods they owned. So this was, one of the negative things with Persia's invasion. Like I said, there were contributions, though, for that invasion, right? The first one was building the temple, which they started. So after one of the kings said, no, we're going to stop the temple building because the people of the land complained and said these people are dangerous, and the temple brought a lot of grief. Another king later on then decided that they can build the temple, and they built the second temple in Jerusalem. And Ezra leads the people. One of the things he does is, um, a lot of the old traditions change, right? When you like move to another country, right? There's a lot of cultural differences. So a lot of things change, right? They were talking about the technicalities of how people worked, who did what, and all this, and it was much different than when they had their own nation, than their old traditions, and you can actually find all this in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. You can actually find both of them. Um, Persia, one thing about Persia, and this is why, again, I say that these kingdoms really started to lead the world to a path of different forms of government. They were tolerant of other religions and other worship. They don't bother you, you don't bother them. And they also were tolerant of civic restoration, okay, in general. So this is one thing I can tell you that Persia did show. They showed a lot of tolerance, and I wouldn't even say that the persecution by Haman was actually because Persian hated Jews or the Jewish religion. I would say it was just one man who wanted to wipe out all the Jews, most likely for the revenge of his great great granddad or whatever he was related to. The next kingdom, all right, which is the kingdom of the Greeks, the Hellenistic Macedonian kingdom. Who was behind that kingdom? Huh? Yes, Alexander the Great. All right. Alexander was, some people hate him, some people love him. All right. He was a great conqueror. He was a genius. All right. He didn't just overthrow Persia, he expanded that empire far beyond what any empire before him had done. He went all the way to India. Okay, so he was deep in Asia. So he did this expansion, and he was the one who overthrew the Persian Empire. When he did that, there was something new that happened. Okay, and something that's actually that impacted Christianity. Okay, something important here happened that actually impacted the early church, Christianity, and all the lands. Okay, all those provinces and lands that he invaded. There was something very important, and we're going to discuss that. After Alexander passes away, though, which we're not gonna talk about Alexander's life, but when he passes away, it gets split. The kingdom gets split. His subordinates, they take pieces of the empire and they create their own little kingdoms, and they have all these places, but it was still considered Greek control. In these cities, even though they were all monarchies, the cities had councils and assemblies like we do today, local councils and assemblies. And you see, the government, the form of government is just, it's evolving, right? It's getting to the point of where we're at right now. It continues to evolve. It might have taken 2,000 years, but it's getting there, right? Alexander the Great, though, he did take control of the land of Israel, all of Judea, around 332 BC, and he did put a siege against Tyre and Gaza, which are also mentioned in the Old Testament books. Tyre, it's mentioned in the Old Testament. It was one of the lands and nations that had interaction with Israel. Let's talk about the negative impacts of the Greek Empire. Well, they persecuted the leaders of the Jews. They did persecute them, and there was temple desecration and suppression of Torah practices. Okay, and I'm talking about that area, the land of Judea. They did persecute the Jews. There was persecution, but there was a lot of positive, and this is what I was talking about. So the Greek language and the Greek culture started to spread in all the lands they took. And this was actually really, really huge for Christianity, because a lot of the early church writings were in Greek. All right? A lot of the books that were written were in Greek, okay, in the Christian church. Greek had become a language all over, almost in half the world at that point. Okay, so everything started becoming Greek, and you know, the early church, there was, everything was Greek. Everything was in Greek. Obviously, the countries still maintained their own languages, but Greek was like the English of today. Okay, it was, English is everywhere, right? You go to any country, you're gonna find a lot of people that know English, and that's how it was back then. So was that was a huge impact um, to Christianity. You know, at least in the beginning of Christianity, before before the schisms and before everyone wanted to strengthen their identity. Sorry, just a second. All right. Now, before we move on, uh, the Greeks, after Alexander, if you read the history books, even though they split and they had their own armies and stuff and they had multiple nations, they began to weaken. Okay, they began to weaken, and unfortunately, they fall to probably one of the greatest empires and longest lasting nations, I would say, on earth, lasted a very long time. And that is the Roman Empire. All right? Roman Empire is the iron, right? Their symbol is the iron. Yep, read it.
The image's head was of gold, of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, and its feet partly of iron and partly of clay.
Yes. But before we move on to the whole the biblical story behind Rome, let's talk a little bit about the government of Rome, how it was formed. So, Rome was first, yeah.
From like 400 BC? Because from what I know, like the Roman Empire started at 27, no?
No, and that's where I'm going to get to.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so the Roman Empire, the empire started in 27 BC, but Rome did not start in 27 BC. It started way before that, and that's what I'm going to get to. So Rome started under rules of kings. Okay, different kings ruled it. They weren't emperors. There was no empire. Okay, and around 509 BC, they actually expelled all the kings. They got rid of the kingship. They got rid of all, and Rome was, in my opinion, probably the first republic, or if you want to call it a democracy. I mean, we live in a constitutional republic right now, so it was something similar. Their Senate had all the power, okay, and their Senate would actually give power to certain people, like officers, any government officials in Rome. They're the ones who controlled everything. So there was a republic there. The Senate was elected by the people. So, and that's how Rome actually started. Okay, and if anybody reads how how the emperors came into play. The first one, obviously, is Augustus Caesar. So whenever they would go to war, the Senate would give power over military to a person, okay? Because you need one person, right, to manage the war. You're not going to have 30 or 40 senators, deciding where this army is going to go next or what it's going to do next, right? So Augustus Caesar takes power from the Senate, but he doesn't hand it back, all right? And in 27 BC, it becomes an empire, okay? He doesn't hand back power to the Senate. Senate could have taken power, but they would have lost because he has the military behind him. All right, he can walk in to Rome with the military, kill off all the senators and the government officials, and take it over by force. And basically, the senators were still there. They were still managing the. The laws and whatever, but there was one exception. Caesar still had say over their decisions. He can override them, he can nullify them, whatever he felt, but the Senate was still there, and they basically became a show, right? Today we have monarchies like in the United Kingdom, but the monarchies are there for show. They have very little power. I mean, there are laws which allow them during wartime to take more power, but you see Parliament has all the power, right? In this case, that wasn't the case. Now, before Augustus Caesar takes over the Rome completely, right? In 63 BC. Pompey, who was a Roman general, he takes over the lands of Judea, the province of Judea. Okay, so Roman influence had already began there, and later on it would become a Roman province. So the Roman Empire, you're right, it did start in 27 BC, but that's because an emperor took power. It was there before. Rome was this concept, right? People look at it, even today, historians look at it as this concept, and everybody wants to be that in those days where the Senate ruled everything. Everything was by election, all right? We see it a lot today. We just don't see as much as some of us might want to see. Can you open up to Daniel 9:26 for me, please? Go ahead.
The 62 weeks Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end of it shall be with a flood. Until the end of the war, desolations are determined.
Thank you. So Daniel is prophesying about this fourth empire. And he's prophesying about what they're going to do. Okay? And he literally foretells the destruction of the temple. Okay? And it's a second temple because during Daniel's time there was no temple. The temple had already been destroyed by Babylon. So he's foretelling the destruction of a sanctuary, right? If you lived in those days, it makes no sense to you, right? You have no sanctuary, you have no temple, but he's foretelling the destruction of a second temple, which happens in 70 AD. So, what negative impacts did Rome have on Israel? Well, there was conquest, okay? There was taxation. You all know that the taxes were high. In the Roman times, even the Jews went up to Christ and asked him, should we pay our taxes to Caesar? And Christ responds, give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and give unto God what is God's. And And obviously, we just read the Second Temple is destroyed in 70 AD. Positive things that came out of Rome. Well, the positive things, again, Rome is another nation that actually, I would say, helped Christianity spread like wildfire. One thing about the Romans, they were great at building roads. Okay? They were great at building roads. They connected everything. They wanted trade all over the empire. Okay? They wanted trade because every transaction that was happening, the Romans what? They collected taxes. It was great for them. Rome was powerful, rich. They had everything, right? So, how did this help us? Well, the apostles used all those roads to preach. They went from town to town, city to city, and these were all Roman territories, and it just spread like wildfire. I mean, Paul was a great example of it. He went everywhere and ended up in Rome. Even during the times of persecution, those roads were still open because obviously, there's trade, there's things going on, so it spread like wildfire. And this is one thing they actually, I would say that contribution they gave is what brought their downfall. All right, that contribution, maybe it was a few hundred years later, but it brings the downfall of these emperors that were persecuting everyone that didn't believe in their gods. There were legal processes, okay? So I don't know if anybody ever heard the talk by Bishoy. He works in the district attorney's office in New York. He gave a talk a long time ago during Lent once, and he was talking about legal processes and laws in Rome, and even Jewish laws. We're not going to really get much into that. So there was always a conflict, okay? The Romans had their laws, okay, and the Jews had their laws, but the Romans brought laws, most people at the time would say are more modern, more civilized, right? There were trials, okay? There were processes. A Roman citizen can go and appeal to the emperor if they're being sentenced for something that that they were doing. Just like we can appeal today, right? We can go all the way up to the highest courts in the land. Well, that's how it was back then. The Romans had these laws. They brought these new laws, and some could say it was to protect people, maybe protect their own interests, but, in the beginning, I would say it was probably to protect people. So, for instance, what happened with Pontius Pilate? Pontius Pilate, and if anybody remembers that talk, Pontius Pilate broke Roman laws. He had no evidence, okay, no evidence whatsoever against Christ. He knew that Christ hadn't committed a crime and the other one did, and he still gave in to the will of the people. And then even worse, he sentenced someone innocent to death. He was the highest ranking person at the time in Christ's trial. He was the highest ranking person in the province of Judea. Okay, under him there were other leaders, and one of them is Herod. Just sending Christ to Herod alone is wrong. It's illegal because he's the highest ranking person. He is responsible for every citizen under him. So he broke a lot of the Roman laws. And that's what Rome did. They brought a lot of laws in. You can say they were fair or unfair, depending on in what position you were in or what. So the Roman citizens would probably claim that it was fair, right? You have this whole due process. But the people in the province of Judea were not Roman citizens, okay? And most of the time, the Jews at the temple, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they would be ruling with Jewish law over their people. But, as you know the story, they can't kill Christ, they can't sentence him to death, and even if they could, they weren't going to do it because the Passover is coming up. So there's a whole story behind that. But they they brought laws to that land. Okay, murder was considered a crime, theft, not paying your taxes. We live in times that have those laws today. Um, the Roman Empire doesn't just end at when Israel ends and Christianity starts. The Roman Empire continues. And because of it, Christianity spreads all throughout the world. All right? That's why I was telling you in the beginning, it was all part of God's plan. Okay? The Son would come from, the Son of Man would come down from, would come down during those days when the sanctuary was there. And it all led up to that. And then after that, Rome just became a tool that God used to spread his word around the world. And after that, you all know the kingdom of Rome, or the Roman Empire, split. There was two kings, and later on there will be Constantine. The Christianity will become the official religion of the Roman Empire. His mother would be known for finding all the holy sites and the cross. So I don't know how many people have been to Jerusalem here, or the Holy Land, I should say, because it's more than Jerusalem. Well, Helen found most of those places through visions. She got visions from God. She's actually considered a saint. And the story behind Constantine, he was an idolater. There's conflicting stories. A lot of people consider him a saint, or we don't know his entire story. There's a lot to it, but we know that Saint Helen, his mother, was a saint, and God revealed to her where everything was, and that's why if you go to the Holy Land today, when you go see the sites, they'll always tell you this is where her visions led, even to the cross of Christ. But it doesn't stop there. So I know today we're talking about 4 empires, right? But there's the 5th empire. There's the 5th empire, and that's, or I would say the 5th kingdom, not empire, the 5th kingdom, and that is God's kingdom. Can you pull out Daniel chapter 7, verses 13 to 14? There's going to be a few verses we're going to read in there. Anybody want to read it? Do you want to read?
I was watching in the night vision, and behold, one like the Son of Man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. Then to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom, the one which shall not be destroyed.
So Daniel is prophesying about who he's prophesying about God. Do you remember? I think it was like a couple of months ago. I mentioned this, and I mentioned this a few times. The Son of Man is mentioned a lot in the Old Testament. You know how people try to say Christ didn't exist before his birth? There's people who will say that he did. Okay, the Son of Man is mentioned many times, even from the days of Abraham. Okay, the Son of Man is mentioned in the Bible, and Daniel is talking about him. Okay, he's talking about his kingdom, his dominion. And this is really the 5th kingdom. The 5th kingdom that Daniel is talking about, that's God's eternal kingdom. And that's where we will end up if we focus on that one true thing, which the nation of Israel failed to do, and that is focus on salvation, focus on God. It was never about a kingdom. It wasn't about who you ruled by. As a matter of fact, till this day, we bless our leaders. Okay, if you ever, there's a lot of services in church, and I'll give you an example. Lent, during the weekday liturgies, there's litanies praying for our leaders, whether it's a president, a king, whatever it is. But there's prayers. We bless our leaders because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who you're ruled by on earth, right? What matters is our salvation. And that's what Israel missed. That was the one thing they forgot. It wasn't about them ruling a piece of land. It wasn't about them fighting over a piece of land. It wasn't about that. It was about they were God's people. They were going to inherit not just land. It wasn't just inheriting that land. It was going to be inheriting the kingdom of God. Okay, and that's where they got sidetracked. They got too comfortable. Of course, Daniel is bringing hope, an everlasting peace under a Messiah, hope of justice, everlasting peace under a Messiah. And that's where we are today. Where there's no, we're ruled by different governments, different peoples. You all see what's going on around the world. Okay, till this day, God's people will be persecuted, and that piece of land, that piece of land that everyone thinks is so important, is being fought over till today. Many people believe it's going to bring us to the end. Every kingdom that Daniel spoke of, every fight over that kingdom. I mean, even after those 4 kingdoms, or during those 4 kingdoms, actually, at the end of the Roman Empire, what happened? The Crusades. Okay, you had the Crusades. The Pope of Rome decided to start crusades to take back the Holy Land because they were invaded. So the piece of land is always being fought for, and everybody's forgetting where the real goal is. Okay, it's not that piece of land. Okay, that piece of land is going to be nothing. It's gonna be flattened. It'll mean nothing at the end of days. And does anybody have any questions? Yeah, can you give him the mic, please? We have to have Uncle Samir on the mic. He has the best questions.
No, I just want to add, if you allow me, one of the important things that happened during the Greek Empire is the Septuagint translation.
Yes.
Can you give us an idea about the Septuagint translation?
No. Can you please, Uncle
Okay,
Samir?
so in very short, the Septuagint translation is the translation of the Old Testament from the Hebrew into the Greek.
Yes.
Because you mentioned actually that the Greek language became the
language
official
everywhere,
language.
yes.
So because the Jewish people were dispersed all over, and the Greek language now is the prevalent language. So one of the kings or the emperor at that time, the Greek Empire, ordered to translate the Old Testament from Hebrew into Greek so that everybody can understand it. And this was done by 70 elders, and that's why it's called Septuagint. Sept is 70. And actually, I see a lot of Orthodox Study Bible here. The Orthodox Study Bible that is the Old Testament and the New Testament is actually translated into
from
English
the original Greek.
from the Septuagint, from the Greek,
Yeah.
not from the Hebrew.
So guys, think about it this way, right? The Jews were dispersed.
Septuagint?
They had lost their land multiple times, and every time someone conquered, they would disperse more. And the next generation and generation after that would learn possibly Hebrew, but they would also learn the language of the land they were in, right? So that's what was happening. It's like today, right? It's like today. I get made fun of, like I just came back from Egypt. I get made fun of because my Arabic is just a complete, mess. But we have the Bible in English, right? English is the prevailing language here. You go to France. French is the prevailing language there. So it's like that, but again, the Greek Empire, okay, was literally a tool that God used, and and that language that they introduced to all these people in all the lands they conquered, it spread God's word even further. All right? The one thing about the Romans, though, that I will tell you, they did not enforce their Roman language on anybody. So the Greek language continued to prevail. Okay, other languages were actually dying down, and this is extra biblical. It's outside the Bible. For instance, the Hebrew language was really centered to the area of Judea. Okay, it was mostly centered there. The Aramaic language, which died down completely shortly after, it was the language Christ used. That died down completely, and it became what? Latin, right? Latin started to spread, okay, but not because the Romans were pushing it. It just happened, and it spread all over Rome and those parts of the empire, and Greek spread everywhere else. So the Romans did not actually impose any of that. The Greeks did. They were making sure their language was the standard language everywhere, standard language of their empire. That is a difference, but it was a tool which God used to spread. Take the mic.
So it seems like in the Old Testament, during the exile, like there's like books written in Aramaic at that time, and then we have Hebrew as well, and then we learn about like the translation of the Old Testament and during the Greek time as well. How come it seems like during once the Persians took over during the exile, how come there is no like linguistic, I guess, influence there, or is there? Like,
Well, hold on. The Persians didn't exile the Jews. They didn't enforce. So they didn't make people get rid of their culture, their religion, their language. They didn't enforce any of that. The Babylonians did. When they exiled everybody, it began. You see, the Babylonians didn't last long. In my opinion, if they would have lasted longer, the Babylonian language would have prevailed. Okay, Babylonian influence, Babylonian culture we would have seen more of it. We don't. Okay, they literally didn't survive much. Okay, the Persian Empire came and took it over, and you know there's actually some history missing about the Babylonian Empire as well, because I was telling you the Medes were actually part of the Babylonian Empire. They were one of the ruling parties there, and when the Persians took over, and this is where the information gets lost, the Persians invaded, the Medes actually went to the Persian Empire and formed unity with the Persians, and that's why it's known as the Empire of Media and Persia. So, yeah. So there is these empires only led to today. It led us to today. It led us to where we're at as Christians. Okay, they were tools that were used. God used them because, like I said, Israel had lost its focus. Okay, it got too comfortable. All right, when you're in peril, right? Any kind of peril, and I'm not gonna say moving to another country, okay, is perilous, but it can be, right? You need something to fall back on, right? And God's your fallback. Okay, and that's what happened with the Jews. They fell back on God. They went back to God. They had nowhere else to go. They didn't have their own king no more. They didn't have their own officials. No, they were in a strange land full of strangers. That's what it was. So they fell back to God. And it was probably the best thing for them, because a lot of Jews, as you read the rest of the Old Testament, a lot of Jews came back to God. You see a lot of Jews that are playing big roles, even in these governments, like the Babylonian government. Daniel was an official there, and those three saintly youth, they worked inside the king's castle, or whatever you want to call it. All right, so there were officials. Ezra and Nehemiah in Persia, they were in Persia. Mordecai, Esther's uncle, was I believe an official at the gate of the king of Persia. So there's these people. The Bible talks about some of them in detail, because they're that reawakening, right? That resurrection of that faith. You know, it came back after they were put into strange lands. It's really. it's really surprising when you're under pressure. Everything changes. Your attitude changes. Everything about you changes. Like you're under pressure. It's no longer, you're not in that comfortable situation. You know, one thing I can tell you, right? I've been in some chaotic, chaotic experiences in my life, right? Everybody has, right? You can go, let's say, on a trip, right, with youth. Take youth on a trip, right? And they cause all these kinds of troubles, right? And it's just different. You're not. You have to react a certain way. You have to, I guess I would say, adapt to that situation. So everybody's different when they're under pressure. Some people will just shut down and go in a corner, right? And some people are going to stand there and face it. All right? So that's what literally happened to Israel. You took them out of a comfortable place, all these Israelites living in their towns and villages, and you shoved them all over a kingdom in strange lands. They're all under pressure. And they were under pressure even in the days of Christ. Okay, there was fighting. If you read historical books, there was always fighting in that land. All right, there were Jews that were trying to uprise against the Roman Empire, during the days of Jesus. Okay, Barabbas is said in. There were historians that were saying that he's actually one of the people who started an uprising against the Roman Empire or against Pilate, and that's why he was in jail for sedition. So, it's just different how you are in when you're ruled by someone else. When you rule yourself, at home, right? You're comfortable at home, right? You're like the ruler of your house. Okay, you feel safe there, right? While you're at home, but when you're out traveling or wherever you're at, your personality, your attitude, everything adapts to that situation. And I can definitely tell you that is 100% true because I experience that all the time. I've ended up in many chaotic situations, and you have to adapt to that situation. And some people will do it quickly, some people will do it slowly. In this case, we see the Jews really going back to God, and God leads them back to the land and allows them to build that second temple. Unfortunately, they lose that temple in 70 AD, like the prophets have prophesied, and even Christ has mentioned, and that's because of the trouble they've caused the Roman Empire. Actually, if everybody wants to know, around 70 AD, the Jews were making trouble. In historical books, they were making trouble against the Roman Empire. That whole land was trouble for the Romans. It was actually, I think they said it was the least profitable province for the Roman Empire. Okay, they lost soldiers there. They lost leaders. They lost like a lot over there. So that became like they called it the snake's nest. Okay, and it became that, and so they had enough, and an emperor came and knocked down the temple. So, yeah, you want to give her the mic?
I had a question about the different materials that are used to describe the different empires. So why is gold referred to Babylon and not Persia, and bronze referred to Greece and not Babylon? And again, why is God's eternal kingdom represented as a stone that broke the image and not like some kind of other weapon or some kind of other tool?
There's a lot of reasons why. Okay, one reason. Let's look at Babylon, right? It was mentioned as gold, right? Gold is what? It's not a strong metal. It's a very valuable metal. It's not a strong metal. So Babylon was all about splendor. The first thing they did was go and steal the gold from the temple. They even used one of the reasons why God allowed Babylon to fall, by the way, and this is in the book of Daniel. And actually, the king, when he calls Daniel to interpret his dreams, it's actually about the fall of Babylon, because the articles from the temple that were stolen, like like the gold cups, the bowls from the temple, the king was actually using that to in one of his banquets. Okay, he was drinking wine out of something that was dedicated to God, that was holy. So God had pronounced judgment on the king, and Daniel translated that for the king. But to answer your question, right, what would you say is the strongest empire out of these four? The Roman. And what's the strongest metal mentioned? The iron. Okay? So for me, I look at it as this. It went by strength of that metal, not by how much it cost. Because all the other metals, bronze, silver, and gold, are more expensive than iron. And for me, it went by the strength of that metal. And Roman Empire was the strongest, and iron is the strongest. And out of iron, we get other metals like steel. All right, so Ankit Samir can probably add to that. Do you have another reason why, Ankit Samir? So that's one of the many reasons historians will talk about, but that's the one that would make the most sense here. Okay, you went from can you give him the mic? Sorry. No, I'm okay. Well, there was only four metals mentioned. Yes. 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 So the stone, the fifth kingdom, it's not one of the four empires. It's the fifth and final kingdom, the kingdom of God. Okay? And that's the goal. That's where Daniel is trying to get us to focus at. All right? And that's what the stone represents. And stone doesn't break that easily, by the way. Not all stone. and stone could also mean like diamond stones, any stone. Yes, sir.
It was like a follow-up question.
Yes, please.
So it seems like the value of the metal gets, I guess, like less and less.
It doesn't mean that the kingdom was less valuable. Just
Right. Does that mean anything? Or?
no. It's Daniel is portraying from top to bottom, from king, the first kingdom to the fourth kingdom, and he's just talking about these metals because of the strength where they are. I mean, look at the timeline, guys. These kingdoms fell overnight except for one, and that's the Roman Empire, the kingdom made of iron. Okay, the Roman Empire only started to fall after it split, actually. In my opinion, it started to collapse. It just, it took time for it to completely be demolished, and it did over the centuries. Other nations rose up and took their land back, and if you go to places like Spain, Barcelona, you see the ruins of the Roman Empire, right? The Spanish took their land. You go to anywhere in Europe that had a lot of Roman influence, you'll see all that. I only spoke about Spain because I was just there, but you can see the ruins of the Romans. The streets are still built like the Romans. So they left an impression on this world. That's how powerful and how strong they were. Iron is the strongest metal that Daniel puts in the book. Yeah.
And
I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say he interprets his own dreams in the same book, like in the same chapter. So like for chapter 2, like he explains it in like I think starting. I can read the important parts, I guess, as for the question that you guys just asked. Let me quickly find it. 1 second. Yeah, so this image's head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. So he keeps going, and even on chapter 7, he goes ahead and talks about, like, there is a dream, the dreams of the animals, the 4 animals, the lion, all of those animals. He again explains what his vision was after he talks about what he means, I think. Yeah, anyway. So just, if you guys want to, I guess, read more about that, he sort of interprets his own dreams.
In his prophetic visions, there's a lot of detail. We're not going to get to cover all of it here, and she covered more of those details. But he talks about a lot of the events to come, and he's talking about symbols for these different nations and kingdoms, in different kinds of symbols, right? Not just metals. There's animal symbols, and even when he prophesies to King Nebuchadnezzar about the fall of Babylon, he's giving more symbols, and that's why he was talking about the head of gold. He's telling him the head of gold and so forth. So there's a lot of symbols in the book of Daniel. And to really understand it, guys, if you really want to read it, take it like maybe half a chapter or a chapter at a time and think about it and go over it. It took me, when I was younger in high school, I had to read that book over and over to understand it. My mistake was I was reading like big portions of it, right? But you really want to understand, you got to like take small parts of it and just go over in your head, picture in your head. There's a lot of symbolism in the book of Daniel. A lot. We actually read a lot of the book of Daniel in Holy Week, especially on Bright Saturday. For those who attend Bright Saturday, we read a lot of it there. Any more questions?
Just one question.
Go ahead, sir.
So the prophecies, it's like, what does that tell us about like God's control over history, and what does that mean for us?
I'm sorry?
The prophecies, like we see in the book of Daniel, what does that tell us about God's control over history?
It's not about control. It's Daniel is talking about the journey Israel is going to undertake. It was never about control. Remember, I told you guys in the Old Testament, okay, and this was a while ago, I said this, the Old Testament is a journey, just like the New Testament is. It's a journey with God. Okay, they went on this journey. Every writer that wrote in the books in the Bible, every writer, first of all, you can see the writings are different. They're based on the characteristics of that writer. 2, you'll find things that this is why we say it's inspired by Holy Spirit. All the stories and the events they're covering in those books are things that are meant for us to learn from and to grow spiritually. This is a journey. Daniel is telling them about their journey. He's telling them about the Messiah. He's telling them about the things to come. He's talking about the fall and where Israel's going to be. I don't think in there he ever said that they're going to become a kingdom again. Okay? That wasn't part of the journey, because the journey Israel had lost that focus. They forgot that they're on a journey with God. Even when they were taken out of Egypt. What happened? They forgot about God. All they did was nag and complain. Okay, that's the problem here. And this is why they ended up staying in the desert for 40 years till the next generation was old enough to take the land. Okay, that's what it's about. It's about that journey with God. And that's all Daniel is focused on here. He's telling them of the things to come, what to expect, and it happened. Daniel's prophetic visions actually happened.
That makes sense. I guess I'm trying to understand, like earlier we talked about Babylon,
About what?
and Babylon, right?
Yes.
Babylon Empire. And we were talking about how God let that empire fall. So that's what I mean by like control. Like when you say let the kingdom fall, what does that mean? Like, does he have control over the kingdom? Like, what
The
does that
kingdom of Israel. You see, the kingdom of Israel no longer wanted God. They no longer wanted his help. They no longer wanted him. When you Well, the kingdom of Babylon, if you read in Daniel, they were judged by God because of the sins that the king of Babylon committed, and Daniel actually told him what God had judged against Babylon because of his sins. So the story goes like this: the king of Babylon was having a banquet, okay, with his officials and whoever else, his friends, who knows who was there, and he was using the articles, the holy, sanctified articles that were dedicated only to God. He was using them for his banquet. He was drinking wine out of the golden cups that were consecrated. They were using the bowls for God knows what. So he was basically, it's sacrilege. He was desecrating what was set aside for God. And to be honest with you, I don't think it was about those articles. I don't think that event was even in there just because those specific articles. It was about us. Okay, it's talking literally about us because we are consecrated to God. Okay, and we are desecrating ourselves. So that king was desecrating something or someone consecrated to God. That's what it was about. Okay, and God had judged Babylon because of that. All right, and their fall came quickly. You see, Babylon rose quickly. Okay, they rose quickly, and usually when you see a country or a kingdom rise that quickly, they tend to either have trouble or fall. All right, if you guys know, America was not easy in the beginning. There was a lot of problems. Okay, America, we became free very fast. We declared independence very fast. But in the beginning of this country, there was a lot of problems. All right, a lot of problems, and some of them staggered, even till today. All right, I'm not going to go into the issues, but there were things, and this is because this country became a country quickly, and that's what happens. Rome took years before they were even an empire. They were already established. Okay, they were an established empire. Read the history books on Rome and all the documents they found. That was already an established country. It wasn't an empire, by the way. It was a country. Okay, it was one massive city surrounded by some provinces. Okay, they were already there. They were established. It didn't happen overnight. They didn't go and declare independence. They didn't do any of that. Okay, that's the difference. Babylon overthrew the Assyrians and then decided to invade as much as possible. Okay, they obviously didn't invade as much as the Persians did. Okay, they didn't get that far, or the Greeks. All right, but that's what happened. I mean, even the Greeks were established, by the way. They had multiple. If you guys know, in Greek, there were multiple empires in Greece. Sorry, there were multiple empires, and Alexander the Great united all of them and went out to invade or conquer the world. That was his goal. That's why I'm indifferent about Alexander. I think he was a genius, right? But at the same time, you don't know what kind of genocides or whatever he did. We don't know. Any other questions? Did I answer your question? Okay. Nope. All right. And glory be to God forever. Amen. I'm going to go through the announcements. I think this is the updated announcement slide. So, okay, so coming up, September 29th, we have service night at 7 p.m. Once a month on a Monday, we come here, prepare sandwiches. We usually start at 7, and then if there's time after a small talk, we go out and give out the sandwiches, or we drop them off at a couple of shelters here. There's a back to school donation drive. So we're collecting new school supplies, backpacks to support students as they head back to class. Every donation, big or small, makes a difference. You can bring your donations here to church. Okay, and let me see if there's anything else. Oh, yes, and there's a trip to Egypt. I believe it's still open. You can find that at travels.sm.nyc, and that's where usually the trips are posted. Travels.sm.nyc. Let me see. There was also something else. Yep. Okay. That's it. On the 28th, Sunday, this coming Sunday, there is a picnic in Central Park. It's usually after the liturgy. So if you attend liturgy, we'll leave from the church and go to the picnic. There's the conference, the SM conference. This is the third annual conference, November 7th to November 9th. I believe it's still open. If you want to go, it's beacon.smsm.nyc. It's still open, Uncle Samir? Okay. And guys, we need to register now. That's the price right now, $325. After that, it goes to $355 if there's space. Okay? If there's space, and there's a whole lineup of speakers. I don't know if you're on the announcement groups. Oh, there we go. There's all our speakers, if anybody wants to know. We have Archdeacon Mark Solomon, Father James Mikhail, Michael Habashi, Mary Ghatas, Andrews Hat, and Philo Abid. And I believe that's it. Yep, okay. Oh, yes, and we have campus ministries. I know a lot of you are in college, undergrad or grad. We do have a lot of campus ministries. If you want to learn more, go to campus.sm.nyc. If you want to get the links to all these announcements, trips, everything, links.sm.nyc. You'll find everything there, and I believe that's it. If you all want to stand up for prayer.
Finally, O Lord, hear us when we say thankfully, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Deliver us from the evil one. Through Christ Jesus our Lord, for thine is the kingdom, power, the